Hello, my grots and gits. Welcome back to Happy Crump and Wargaming. Today we're going to be talking about conduct at Warhammer 40,000 tournaments. This can be very intimidating for newer players who don't really know what's expected of them when they're going to a tournament. Also, sometimes you're not going to be completely prepared if it's a new experience for you. It can be intimidating. So what we're going to do is we're going to set expectations for you so that you know what you're walking into and you know what is expected of you. This video is actually done in help to promote the Hammer Time Team events on April 20th and 21st in Kiloa, BC, Canada. I'm going to mispronounce Kiloa because it is what it is, but I love you anyway. So let's get right on into this video. So first thing that you need to do as soon as you are getting ready for a tournament is you are going to read the tournament pack. Every single tournament's going to have one, and if they don't, it's probably not a very good tournament. So essentially every single tournament's going to have a packet, which is going to be a document which will be updated as days go on. That was going to explain to you things like what are the actual missions you are playing, what are the terrain rules, what is the FAQ that you're going to be having into it. And they're all going to have it. Included in this packet is going to be things that talk about the conduct system. So what is expected of you as the player, what you have to bring, what is the time schedule, can you potentially get a red card or a yellow card for your play. There's actually tons of information in this packet, and I actually really encourage everyone to read these packets before you show up to a tournament, because you might find that you are playing in a tournament that uses the WTC rules for standing inside of a wall, where you thought you were playing in a tournament that would allow you to move block charges, make charges impossible by standing 1.1 away from the wall. So there's lots of information in these packets, and they will absolutely change the type of list that you will bring to a tournament. So I would always read them ahead of time. So just as an example, this is taken straight out of Hammer Time Teams, which is in part what this video is for, is to help people get ready for this tournament. And this is one of the things that you'll see in as part of the rules packet. So here it's giving you list building advice, 2,000 points from the Leviathan pack. Each team, because this is a teams event, may only have each codex index represented once in their team, and lists are due 2 weeks prior to the event start. So what does this mean? Well, this is actually a really important thing for you to read the packet for, because if you don't read the packet, you won't know this. So let's say you have two armies that both want to take demons as allies. So let's say you're taking both Chaos Space Marines and you're taking Chaos Knights, and both of you want to take demons because Chaos Knights really want those Nurglings and Chaos Space Marines really want that blue scribe, etc. Well, only one of you can take the demon allies, because it can each codex or index in this example can only be represented once, guys. It's only one time. Do not do it more than once. So make sure you read the packet. There's tons of information in there. Okay. What equipment do you need to bring with you? You as the player, this is your responsibility as the player. Well, I always recommend bringing yourself a tape measure and a backup tape measure. I have had tape measures break, and it is very frustrating to try to borrow your opponent's tape measure all game. That is a huge problem, and honestly, all the time for exchanging the tape measure should always come off of your clock if you put yourself in that situation. So always bring a freaking backup. I also like widgets, so those little 3-inch measurers that you can use that can help you make pile-ins, consolidation movements a lot more easy. I always recommend those. Dice trays, maybe not 100% necessary, but a dice tray is really nice to have. It can make just making sure that you guys aren't always fighting about what dice is cocked, what dice is not cocked, etc. You're going to want to have a clock with you, and many times tournaments will provide these clocks, but I keep a clock in my bag, and so I'll just bring it with me. You can also always use an app on your phone, but you need some way of measuring time between you and your opponent. You never want to run into a situation where you have 3 hours to play a game and your opponent takes 2 hours and 45 minutes of it and you only play for 15 minutes and then they win. That is nonsense. Bring a chess clock. Then you're going to want a laser pointer. I use one that I got from, I think it's from the Army Painter. That is not sponsored at all. It's just, I think it's what I have. I spent $8 on it, and holy crap, it is the single best piece of equipment I've ever bought for Warhammer. You shine it, and it has a light that shows you a straight line for checking line of sight. It's freaking awesome. You want to bring objective markers for you. Once again, a lot of times your tournaments will have objective markers there, but if you're having a big tournament of, let's say, 100 people, and there's going to be 50 tables active, and each table needs 5 objectives, that's a lot of objective markers. They might not have enough, so it's always a good idea to have objective markers with you. Then your dice, and this is a really important one, because you want to confirm in the rules packet, or in the tournament packet, that you are allowed to have dice with symbols on them. There can be a lot of confusion, especially around the time when you're using dice that might have a symbol on the 1, and then some of the other dice you're using have a symbol on the 6. Well, I know at the WTC, which is the largest team tournament in the world, if you are found to have a dice that has a symbol on the 1, and you also have dice that have the symbol on the 6, that is an immediate yellow card, and your team will suffer, I think it's a 25-point penalty in that round. It is a big, big deal. And the reason for this is that you don't want your opponent or yourself to ever be confused and accidentally think something's a 6 when it's not. So only bring dice that have symbols on either the 6 or the 1. And then lastly, make sure you bring yourself some snacks, because these can be actually quite long days. I know I always bring salt packets, so I always will have a hydrating salt in my water that I'm drinking. But this is actually very important. Don't be that guy. Don't be the guy who brings hard-boiled eggs that smells really bad. Taylor Swift is going to be very disappointed in you. She won't be happy with it. Don't do it. It's gross. No one wants to smell that. All right, let's move on. Preparing your army. So what do you need to do to prepare your army for this tournament? Well, there's always going to be some form of paint standards. However, some tournaments might be a little lax on them. Some tournaments might be very strict on paint standards. I actually have been to a tournament that had no painting standard, but typically you're going to have painting standards. Conversion and kit bashes are almost always accepted, but they can be no modeling advantage, and I'll show you what that means on the next slide. We love conversions in Warhammer, and even at very strict tournaments like when I went to the WTC, which has exceptionally strict modeling rules, you're allowed to kit bash and convert, but everything has to be on the correct base, it has to be the correct size, it has to be the correct dimensions, and different tournaments have different lax rules. So the one that we're talking about today, Hammer Time, has more lax rules than, say, the WTC would, but they still have standards. What does WYSIWYG mean? It means what you see is what you get. Basically, it refers to the idea of if your units have bolters, you have to have bolters on them. You can't have one guy with a flamer and one guy with a missile launcher and one guy with a sniper rifle, but all of the modeling is a bolter. This changes by tournament to tournament as well, and it's normally very well explained in the tournament pack. I will tell you, there is leniency here. The point is that we don't want people to get confused. If you have a unit of 10 knobs and only 8 of them have power claws and 2 of them have big choppas, but on your data sheet, every single knob in there is equipped with a power claw, I would just send an email to my TO, be like, hey man, I don't want to have to break my models apart to make them look correct, or I don't have extra power claws to make it work. Can I take this unit and say they're all equipped with power claws? 9 times out of 10, the TO is going to say, of course, no problem. The whole point is we just want to check with our TO first. So let's check out the standards for Hammer Time here. And this is very typical of what I've seen for a lot of other tournaments. So in this example, this Rhino is primed in black, light-coated in gray, and then looks like they may have dry brush blue on top of it. No, it is not battle ready. Then on the next picture, we see an example of this Grav tank, Clades Grav tank. It's simple, but there's 3 colors on it. They're like, cool, you're good to go. It's legal. You can use it. Then there's another one where they put a scenic base on the Terminator, etc. So, of course, that's a pass. So this is the standards that they have. If you're ever concerned about whether you meet the standards, make sure you send an email to the TO. This is an example for kit bashing so you guys can see. A lot of people will like to change the bases of these flight stands. Lord knows I want to, because holy crap, those flight stands are annoying. So on the first picture that we have here, we have a picture of a very scenic base for a Venatari, and then we have a picture of a Venatari on a normal standard flying base. Well, in this situation, yes, this is an acceptable kit bash because you're not changing the dimensions of the model. It's the same height. It's got the same pose-ish. It's going to be accepted as a correct conversion. However, on the bottom one, Gandalf says, "You shall not pass." And this is a very reasonable and rational thing to say because when you have that Venatari standing on the flight stand, he's significantly shorter, and it can be a huge advantage to the player who put them down on the normal base. So make sure that your models are within the same dimensions as the ones that you're converting to make them appear as. Always check with your TO. Players. All right, on a team tournament specifically, can be a little bit different for individuals, but it's still very, very similar. So for teams, you're generally going to have either 5-mans or 8-man teams. It's the most common. Then you're going to be allowed to bring coaches and captains. Now, the coaches and captains things is more exclusive to teams. During team play, after you get through your pairings, and if you want to know how pairings work, that can maybe be. Actually, I think I've already done a video on how pairings work. I can post that on the links. Maybe I'll link it at the end of this video. But typically during the actual game, players are not allowed to talk to each other on the same team. You can obviously, of course, talk to your opponent, but you can't talk to other players on your team, even though you'll be at tables around each other. This is because we don't need cross information. It allows for unfair advantages, etc. So the only people who are allowed to talk to the players are going to be your tournament officials or your coaches / captain. So your coaches and captain are allowed to go around and they can talk to people at their table. However, there is no coaching allowed. You cannot say, hey, I expect you can deep strike here, or you can do whatever here. All they are allowed to really do is they can communicate very basic concepts. Be like, hey, listen, dude, I need you to get reckless because we have to get 18 points on this matchup or we'll lose. You can say that, but you can't say, check that firing line. That would immediately result in a big penalty. And that penalty can be a yellow card, red card, depending on whatever it is. Then officials. So there's going to be officials at tournaments. You're going to have referees. You're going to have tournament organizers. Generally speaking, people don't understand how to utilize referees. So referee, his job is to make sure the game is played correctly. That's all. People get way too intimidated by referees. They think it's like it's wrong to call referees to the table. It's not wrong to call referees to the table. If you and your opponents are having a dispute about a certain rule interaction, or if a model can actually make a charge or whatever, never argue with your opponent. There's really no point. You can have a quick discussion. If it's clear that you two are not seeing this the same way, call the referee. The referee will come over, and his job is to make sure that he or she, but it's probably going to be he, we're playing Warhammer, he is going to make the decision of, actually, yes, you do have this line of sight, and then no one's mad at anyone. It's a third party who makes the decision. There's no more conflict. The referee's main role is to make sure there's no conflict between the players and to make sure the game is played very fair. So what he doesn't need to be doing is you don't need to be calling him over to ask him how a pylon works. If you don't know how a pylon works, that's on you. You need to learn the rules of the game. And I recommend you subscribe to Happy Corrupted Wargaming to do so. But anyway, one thing I recommend when interacting with referees is if there is any reason you feel like you need to call a referee, call the freaking referee. It's not an insult to your opponent to call a referee to check in on things. I had things at the WTC where people called a referee on me. I was correct. There was no problem. They were just like, yeah, dude, I just wasn't certain on that. No issue. Call the referee, check things out. It makes the games much, much smoother. However, whenever you call a referee, you really, really need to make sure that you have the relevant rules ready for the referee to review so they can make an informed decision. So, for example, I was at a tournament recently, and I was playing against another orc player. It was an orc mirror match. And my opponent thought that whoever's turn it was got to decide who was first, which is not correct. That's not in the core rules. There's actually a very specific way to handle it in the core rules. So I called the referee over. I showed him the rule in the core rules that said what happens is the opponents have a roll-off, and the winner of the roll-off declares who chooses to wah first. And it might seem like a small thing, but it's actually a really big thing for the way the game goes. So the referee ruled in my favor because I showed him the rule, and then there was no problem. We moved on. So I never fought with my opponent. I informed him of the rule, but he thought I was wrong. So we just called the referee to settle it. No issues. Then you had a great game. So that's the way I recommend you interact with the referees. So now when you're playing in a teams tournament specifically, and actually at some individuals tournaments, you're seeing people start to do this as well. And I think we might see more of this new scoring system here, especially when we're looking at how LVO is now adopting the WTC, a lot of the WTC FAQ. We might start seeing more of this scoring system. But essentially, on most all team tournaments I've heard of, they use a differential for scores. And so I'm going to explain this to you right now so you kind of understand what you're walking into. When you're looking at a differential for scores, let's say you score a 84 and your opponent scores an 83. Well, that would be a VP victory point difference of less than 5. So on a 0 to 5, that means one player gets 10 victory points, the other player gets 10 game points. So 10 game points to 10 game points, that would count as a draw. Okay? Now, let's say I scored an 80 and you scored an 86. That would give me a 9 game points and you would get an 11 game points because you were more than 5 points over my score. The reason why this is really important for teams is that many, many times you can actually put in a player who has an army that's got a bad matchup, and you can tell them to play for the draw. So what they do is they play very reserved, and they try to get their score just super close to the opponent. They're not trying to win, they're just playing for the draw. And it makes the team tournament, the team dynamic, very, very fascinating. So I love this type of scoring. It works really, really well. Let's look at probably this is the last subject for today. This is the sportsmanship at tournaments. And Hammer Time has this actually detailed pretty well in their player pack, but I'm going to run through it for everyone here because this is a very, very, very important part of the game. So first off, let's look at withholding information. You never withhold information from your opponent when you're playing at a tournament. There should never, ever be a situation where there's a gotcha. All right. And the way that I like to fix this to make sure that there's never any gotchas between myself and my opponent is I always do a army overview for them before the game starts. So it's very quick and simple. What I do is I just go through my generals or all my characters. I go through their enhancements. I go through all of my army. If I have any weird abilities, like I have a scoot and shoot, right? So you get to shoot and then move. I make sure I tell them this unit has that ability. If I have the ability to move after you move within 9 inches of me, I make sure to tell my opponent this model has that ability. I always tell them my turn 1 threat ranges. So how far can I actually move in turn 1? I make sure that they understand all of the mechanisms of my army. Now, that doesn't mean I'm telling them my plan. That's a very, very different thing. You do not need to tell your opponent your plan, but you do need to tell your opponent if you have any weird rules that maybe bend the rules of the game at all, which, like, for example, outside of movement phase movement, things like that, which can really surprise people. You need to make sure that they know that. If you're a Grey Knight player, this is a big deal. If you're a Grey Knight player, you need to make sure your opponent understands the interaction with Mista Daimos. So if you move within 9 inches of me, I can 4-1 CP, pick my unit back up into reserves, and then at the end of this same movement phase, I can bring that same unit back down and wrap it with a rapid ingress. You need to tell them that you can do that. If you don't, that is a gotcha, and you're kind of a dick. So you need to make sure your opponents understand the gotchas. That does not mean you need to tell your opponent your game plan, all right? You can still trap your opponent. You can still outplay your opponent. You don't need to give your opponent takebacks. If your opponent makes a mistake, you can punish them for it. You don't need to give them the ability to take things back. The only time I ever allow opponents to have takebacks in tournament play is if they are operating under false information. So let's say, for example, I have a lieutenant with combi weapon, and he gets to move 6 inches after you move within 9 inches of me. And I say that once at the beginning of the game. And my opponent maybe moves a unit up, and the second he does, he's never played Space Marines before. I'm not talking about a veteran opponent. I'm talking about someone who's never played Space Marines before. This is their first time, right? And then they move within 9 inches of the lieutenant. I will say, hey, if you finish your movement there, you know I can move, right? At that point in time, my opponent goes, oh, right. Give them the opportunity to change it. Like I said, I might not do that against a veteran player who's like on the WTC team or something like that, but I will 100% always detail that out for everyone so that they have that information. So you don't really need to give takebacks. You just need to give your opponent the information they need to make good decisions. And that's basically the last part. It's communication, right? This is a game that we are playing together. We are playing Warhammer 40,000 is a 2-player game. You and your opponent are playing together. If your opponent wants to say that your opponent's plan is to deep strike behind some ruins and they want to make sure that they're hidden so that you can't see them in your shooting phase. Well, as long as they verbalize that and they say that, then help them make sure that's real. Make sure that you check the lines. Make sure you check your movement ranges. Make sure you go, okay, cool. Actually, I can see you there, so maybe you might want to scoot him a few centimeters backwards. Work together to play the game together. On the same side, it is up to you to communicate your intentions with your opponent. And I have an entire video that also I'll link at the end that is about playing by intent and how to do it correctly versus how to do it the crappy way. All right, and then lastly, how can our tournament organizers really encourage sportsmanship? This was actually a slide that was asked for, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure I include this. When you encourage sportsmanship at tournaments, this is one of the main things that's going to keep people coming back to your tournament. So you have to enforce sportsmanship. You need to have a hard line for it. If an opponent is caught cheating, they need to be punished. They need to either be banned or severely punished by victory points and shamed. If your opponent is caught being an asshole, they need to be penalized. It needs to be communicated. You can't let people slide with doing things that breach your code of conduct. You have to be strict about it. At the same time, that doesn't mean that you're being a jerk. Be very upfront about your code of conduct and make sure that people understand. No, sorry, at this tournament, the spoken language is German or the spoken language is English. If we catch you speaking a different language at the tournament to someone else who's not at your table, then that could be communicated as getting coaching in a foreign language that we can't understand. We will interpret that as cheating. You need to have strict guidance on this. Then the another thing that I really, really like, and shout out to Invasion, which was a huge tournament that I went to maybe a couple months ago. they did a great job of this. They encouraged sportsmanship so much. They actually had a hidden prize for the best sportsman of the weekend, and that prize was amazing. It was like $300 worth of paints. It was a huge prize. It was the biggest prize they gave for anything. So they do a great job of encouraging sportsmanship. So I don't mean to say that you need to give out a $300 prize for your people's sportsmanship prizes, but I do think it's a good idea to incentivize people to shoot for sportsmanship. So this is how we're going to be conducting ourselves at a Warhammer 40k tournament. The big takeaways, guys: you're playing the game with someone else. If there's rules disputes, don't get mad at your opponent. Call the referee, let them make the decision. Make sure you read the freaking tournament pack, because if your army sucks at sites of power, maybe you need to take a different army to this tournament. You don't want to get caught out by that. If your army requires certain lines of fire and you see that on the terrain layouts for the games you're going to be playing that you're not going to get those lines of fire, maybe take a different army. Read your tournament pack, be friends with people, respect your referees, and have a jolly merry time playing the game of Warhammer 40,000. Until next time, I'm Jonathan Arkin with Happy Corruption Wargaming. Thanks so much for your time. Bye-bye.